Здравейте, драги зрители! Air fresheners expended, we can breathe normally once again. At least for now. Who knows when the grandfather or others relating to him will grace us. In the meantime, as a palate cleanser, I've decided to snatch another rare treat for you that is significantly nicer to be around than the previous one. Or at the very least more pleasantly scented. Namely relating to the Adepta Sororitas. I feel confident in wagering that most of you are familiar with the Sisters of Battle, the militant wing of the Imperial faith, devoted to the Emperor arguably more than anyone else in the galaxy, to the point where through them he often exercises his will upon the material plane. Dauntless, unwavering, and inspiring to all loyal subjects of His Majesty, while at the same time being a terror in the form of his fury made manifest and cleansing fire upon the enemies of humanity, and those who stray from their one true Lord and Master's light. Something that may have eluded some of you, however, is the fact that they are not so singular in their function. Obviously, the glorious brides of the Emperor that take to the field to crush their opposition under their power-armored boots are the most famous. But their faction's name, the Adepta Sororitas, is a significantly bigger umbrella that includes more than just everyone's favorite nuns with guns. Alongside them, there exist the ranks of the Orders Famulos, who organize and maintain the households of particular imperial nobility, whilst also acting as diplomats and advisors to people of import. The Orders Dialogus, who seek out and study the various dialects of Gothic, as well as the languages used by aliens and other forces, so that the subjects of the throne can know how to best deal and counter them. And last, but certainly not least, the Orders Hospitaller, sisters dedicated to the healing arts, as well as caring for the soldiery and the general populace, as they can serve as medical personnel attached to various Imperial Army forces, while also patroning and running hospitals, orphanages, and other similar institutions across the Emperor's domain. Due to this, they are by far the most beloved by the people residing in it. Alas, despite their significance in the lore, they rarely get the spotlight in comparison to their other sisters. Thus, I hope for today's tantalizing morsel to honor them with your delight. Without further ado, please enjoy this creation.
Distant shellfire trumpeted at the sun's descent. Even though the lines had been pushed forward a week ago, the might of the Emperor's guns was still audible within their now rearguard base. If one was close to the ground, they could even feel their thunder. Vestalia would have been more than happy if she would have the joy of only listening to them. Alas, duty had ordained otherwise. All around, the Order of the Sanguine Vigil's makeshift medical wing echoed the grunts, groans, and occasional screams of the many wounded that had been saved from the front lines. Underpinning them were the voices of her fellow Hospitaller sisters, giving diagnoses, estimating medicinal doses, or shouts of commands and instructions. While the main force of their order rode forth to deal death to the Emperor's enemies, here they fought humanity's most ancient enemy, death. As ever for their species, it was not an easy battle. Many sacrifices would slide through their hands, but still the women pressed on, denying the dark cold any victims they could. In between the rush of their combat, Vestalia was halted by someone calling out in her direction. "Marion! Marion, are you there?" It was one of the wounded men, outstretching his hand in the air. His attire gave her no hint of his heritage, as he was clearly not from any of the storied regiments currently fighting for this world. Looking down at him, the young sister could only surmise his injuries. A glancing shot that nearly struck true, based on the minuscule patch of burned flesh showing from under the bandages enveloping the right half of his head, and a bite from one of the fiendish avian pack beasts their Xenos opponents in the theater had deployed, estimating by the shape of the missing piece of flesh from his torso. All of this she considered in her mind as she set her equipment aside, sank to her knees beside him, and softly said, while taking his hand in hers,
"Yes, I am here. You do not need to shout."
His unobstructed eye was glazed, suggesting to her that he couldn't really see anything beyond her vague shape. She became even more sure of this when it began to drown in its tears and his face contorted in pain. Is Is it really you, my love? He sobbed out, with mild disbelief coloring his voice. Intuitively, she bowed slightly, while her fingers gingerly moved his hand to cup her cheek, at which point she nodded and replied.
Of course, I would never let you be alone in such a trying moment, beloved.
Her voice was perfectly even, masking her touch sliding down from his hand to his wrist, where she could feel his pulse slowly fading. They had done all they could for him, but from what she could deduce, he was being called back to Terra. His fingers stiffened slightly, and his eye closed as he began to weep quietly. I'm so sorry. I never should have left you. If I hadn't been deployed, you wouldn't have had to go through the terror of those things attacking behind our lines. In an instant, Vestalia's eyes momentarily widened in disapproval, and she quickly, but carefully, placed a finger over his lips to silence his words and instead added,
Shh. No, banish the thought, my dear. You answered the Emperor's call and stood resolute under his banner. It would grieve me more if you were to choose me over him. Words cannot express how proud I am for someone so devoted to be my man.
Slowly, his eye tried to peer past the sorrowful lake it had submerged itself in, and his breathing began to lose its rasp as she continued.
Rest now, for you have a great journey ahead of you. I will meet you again at the throne by his side.
Pain gave way to calm as his features forced themselves into a smile. His thumb gently ran over her skin as his last breath was ushered out. My beautiful Marion, my angel, I love you. Closing her own eyes for a moment and sighing, Vestalia respectfully returned his limp arm over his chest, crossing it with the other and doing her best to arrange his fingers in the shape of the Holy Aquila.
What was all that about?
A snort came from behind her, immediately recognized as Imelda, one of the battle sisters that had remained as part of their guard force.
I took away his suffering so that he could pass less painfully.
The Hospitaller replied bemusedly, finally closing the man's eye. Imelda, in turn, tisked and asked again.
Did you have to waste so much time on him, though?
This time, her sister looked back at her, disapproval clearly drawn over her face, while standing up and saying,
He did his duty and gave his life for the Emperor. Do you not believe the great angel would have awarded him these last few moments of peace?
No response came from the warrioress, as her own features displayed her contemplating the provocation. Instead, she simply looked away and walked off. Her sister did not pursue her, both due to lacking the interest to do so, and because her attention was demanded by her superior calling to her from across the room.
Vestalia! Take that sack of bandage cloth to the river and wash it all. We just got a report that someone finally managed to get in contact with that Mordian regiment and got them to retreat, so we'll need all the spares we can get.
Yes, Sister Palatine.
She affirmed and set on her given task. Half an hour away from the encampment was the riverbed they had to cross in the prior month. Like another cruel joke from the universe, only after they had fought their way past it did the dry season begin, causing the watery serpent to recede. By now, a 2-meter drop had revealed itself before one could reach the somewhat diminished but still surging river. Vestalia would have thought that the worst part of her assignment would be the devouring mud of the ground she would need to cover after dropping into the riverbed. That was, until a most unpleasant sound heeded her from her side.
Guila!
Instantly she let go of the container she was carrying and raised her hands up, slowly turning her head to the side. What met her glance was the heavily breathing, helmeted visage of one of the Xenos they fought against for this world, pointing a pistol of their kind's design at her. It must have been washed down the river as it was stuck and covered in the surrounding mud, hence her not immediately spotting it. The most important observation she could make from her position, however, was a streak of blue liquid leading her eyes to its seemingly mangled legs. Recalling as much of her Dialogus sister's lectures, she tried saying in the creature's own language,
Healer. Can take your pain away.
Its head shook slightly as it groaned and responded in a pained but significantly better Gothic than she expected.
Spare me the butchery of my tongue, monster. Why would I trust anything said by you Imperials?
A careful exhale escaped Vestalia's lungs as she closed her eyes and continued.
Since you obviously lack faith, common reason should suffice.
She allowed herself the brazenness to fully turn her head at the fire warrior.
Unlike my sisters, I am not meant for the battlefield. I merely tend to its fruit. From my expertise, I surmise you won't be able to escape this prison. Thus, you can spare me the wasting of my time and shoot me, so you can die by the search party that will be sent for me. Or, should you evade them, to simply drown when the water rises again. Or, you can let me do my Emperor-given duty. The choice is yours, Xenos.
Judging by its subtle body language, she presumed that it genuinely considered her words. Moments later, said presumption would be confirmed.
Alright, I accept your offer of aid. And if you try anything...
Its latter words were highlighted by another prod of its pistol. Nodding in affirmation, she carefully approached the fallen Tau, hands still raised. Tension made the air feel as thick as the mud until she was finally close enough to reach the alien. Both of them stared at each other for a few heartbeats before it wordlessly gestured for her to proceed. At that point, she bent down, digging her boots as solidly as possible, and began pulling him out towards the closest dry patch of ground. Even when accounting for his gear, the fire warrior was surprisingly light, but the wet earth ensured that it would not be an easy endeavor. As soon as they reached solid ground, Vestalia ceased her dragging and let it sit up, then let go in order to recover her breath. Apparently taxed by the endeavor itself, the Tau removed its helmet and reconstituted its breathing as well. In between the intake of air, it turned to look up at her and said in an uncannily human way,
Thank you. I admit, the thought of dying in that mud definitely haunted me.
The Hospitaller simply shook her head to establish better composure and approached the being from behind, stating,
Let me examine you. If you were sloshed around in the river, you may have suffered cranial damage.
Slightly hesitant, the fire warrior gave a nod of approval as he lowered his pistol and straightened his back. Wordlessly, Vestalia approached and ran her hands over its neck first, as she looked for anything unusual.
You know, great human,
The Tau spoke.
From all the pointless worrying, I was starting to believe that the majority of your kind were too far gone in their hatred and blood craze to display any actual valor as you have done. That you would use words just as much as anything else in the blind pursuit of petty murder.
Honorless deceit is the way of the alien and the heretic. I have told you no false word this entire exchange, and I do not plan to.
The sister replied, before remarking on her observation.
So, subdermally, your anatomy is surprisingly close to that of humanity.
As she put a hand under his chin and the other over his head, gently nudging it forward during her examination. If she were on its opposite side, she would have seen the Xenos' face momentarily embrace the colors of realization, underpinned by the faintest of curves of a smile as it added.
Exactly. That is the whole point of the greater good. If you want the galaxy to be a better place, we should all stop focusing on our differences and instead unite under the aspects that we have in common.
I see. If it is that similar, I guess the results should be the same.
Results?
The fire warrior could barely ask before Vestalia's hands stiffened, and in a single forceful motion she snapped its neck. Shock and betrayal overtook the alien's features as it collapsed. In the last moment of defenseless consciousness it had, it would see her pick up its pistol, which she then discharged into its head, leaving the Hospitaller's expression of utter disgust as the last image it would ever see. With a dismissive grunt, the sister flicked the inhuman weapon back into the mud, then returned to her originally assigned task, annoyed that she would likely be scolded for being late when she finally returned to the encampment.
Even if the Hospitaller are technically not combatants, in their zeal, drive, and dedication they are still as much of an Adepta Sororita as any of their bolter, flamer, and melta-wielding sisters. Those who are aware of this fact know exactly what their Emperor-given duty is, without the need for further explanation. A bit shorter than usual, for which I plead forgiveness, but matters of the world beyond the mines intervened, necessitating time be dedicated to them. Keeping a schedule is somewhat difficult for a silly little rat such as myself, but I will strive to keep it up as you, dear viewer, most certainly deserve every ounce of effort put in it. If the video brought you satisfaction, please let me know by snapping the like button. Have you been craving stories for a particular piece of lore or crossing of elements from it? Share your desire in the comments below. And if you wish to keep up to date with future releases on the channel, you would have my utmost thanks for subscribing. With that, I bid you a fine rest of your day. Do widzenia.